first of all, I'm Don Harrier, and I organize this thing, family history group, with all kinds of things. And so we thought, why not do a tour of the cemetery in Hugo? We better do it with local Crever.
We want.
Sure.
Well,
I'm not the sage of Hugo, let's put it that way.
but you lived here a long time.
Okay. I'll start out with the man that built this, okay? Father Lloyd Joseph Fortin. And some of us that were in school at that time, Jim Gitz was our teacher. So that would put us in about the 7th grade. When we saw Father Fortin coming over to the high school, or to the grade school, we knew there was something going on, some sort of a project, okay? And our project was, at that time, was to put these rocks. He had a couple of stock tanks, okay, with water in them. And there wasn't any water out here except a pump right over there. But he had kind of a water wagon that he pulled behind his car. And, Robert Burkhardt, Bob Thielbar, myself, the Granger twins, Richard and Roland, there were a group of us that he would pose upon. This wasn't built in a day, okay? He would impose upon to come out here, and we would get the rocks in here early in the morning and go from there. And he usually had 1 or 2 people helping him. One would be Adlor or Delor Tiro, who was the caretaker of the cemetery at that time, and the other one was Jerry Brisson, Judy, Mary, David, their grandfather.
Gloria.
Okay?
Gloria.
And these were not young men, but a lot of the people standing here today, including me, are not young men anymore. But we were in charge of getting the rocks in these stock pens pretty early in the day, and then the reason for that we realized after, and this is very important, that when the masonry, concrete, or cement starts drying, it doesn't pull away, the concrete doesn't pull away from the rock. And when you walk around, I'm kind of proud of this, to be honest with you. The concrete's not pulling away from the rock. There were a sister or two that I asked, what do you remember about the cemetery, when I talked to them? And Sister Nancy said, I remember we were Girl Scouts, Gina and I, and my mother would bring us out here every week, and we had to pump water and come over here. Gina's shaking her head. We had to come over here and water the plants that were in this shrine.
Cecilia Benier and Debbie Burkhardt, too.
I'm sorry, louder.
Cecilia Benier and Debbie Burkhardt, too.
Okay, see? So what's the bottom line on that? So there is some history, family history and stuff like that. This was built in about, it had to be 1952 or 53. And to see it still standing the way it is absolutely remarkable. You know, what is that? We got 23 plus almost 50 years. We got 70-some years on this shrine right here. Does anybody know what the purpose of it was? Can you tell me? Anybody? What do you think it might be, Linda?
Well, I just thought it was to honor Mary because it's the Shrine of Fatima.
You can walk around this and say the rosary.
Oh, see, now
How about
that I did not know.
You didn't know that?
No.
No kidding.
Never
Did you,
wanted to
Gina?
know.
My mother, Lorraine, was really into the rosary, so I bet Gina walked around this more than once. Huh? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Help me out here. But anyway, to have it still standing and look as good as it does after 70-some years is quite a tribute to that man, to Father Lloyd Joseph Fortin, okay? We did not get into that part of it, but if you look here, you can see where the rosary would start right here at the cross, and then go around right there, and then go all the way around, and come back up here. And there was, you know, he was pretty particular about his rocks, okay? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
we put a rock wall in our backyard, and we about got a divorce over it. I would grab a rock, Judy would grab a rock, and then it got that
We'd
way.
stand back and look and go, no!
Finally, we mustered up 3 sons, and said, put these rocks down for us. And as long as I bought beer, they were over there just putting rocks all over.
Jim said, go in the house. We're not emotionally attached to all these rocks. They just put them up.
That's the way it was, heading west. Huh? But this is quite a structure, and I was surprised that a lot of the people weren't aware of the fact that you could walk around this and say the rosary and stuff like that, because it was, you know, quite a feat. In 1958, I had gotten laid off from the railroad, and after Mass, I was standing there talking to Father Fortin, and he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I got laid off on Friday from the Northern Pacific Railroad. He says, I'm leaving this afternoon for Arizona, California, Wyoming. He said, why don't you come along with me? So I got to know the man pretty well, and the footprint that he left in Hugo is beyond. You're shaking your head, Gloria.
Oh yeah, I know. I remember him.
I mean,
clearly.
the footprint that man left in this town. He named a lot of those streets that are over there, David, where you live. Okay, David and Kathy. He named those. The city would hire him to do different jobs. He worked on the old park over here. If you remember, there were some basketball standards there. I remember he and Adler Tiro and a few other guys made those and put them up. And oh, what else? He would just left a real footprint here with what he could do. A lot of the furniture and the doors in St. John's Church, he made. He started out with raw wood and he made those. So what am I trying to say? The man doesn't always get a real good rap, but he did a lot for the city of Hugo.
Yeah.
And
he did
a lot of
windows.
people.
He made the stained
Pardon?
glass windows.
Stained glass
Oh,
windows.
he and Juan and Lutz made
Yeah.
those stained glass windows. And if you want to look a step further, the Stations of the Cross, a lady named Claire Peltier painted those. How many of you knew that?
No.
You had to be around then, okay? She was a young lady. She had just gotten out of high school. She had a heck of a talent, and she was also very good musically. That whole Peltier family.
Yeah.
That would be the blacksmith, Don.
Yeah.
E.O. Eugene O. Peltier. And that would be his daughter from his second marriage. There was Jean Peltier and Claire. Anyway, if you do look at the shrine down at the end down there.
You do those rocks too, Mike?
No,
Okay.
no, I was gone by then. But I'm sure somebody was soaking those rocks. He built that shrine down there for the simple purpose on Memorial Day. He was an Army chaplain in World War II, and he pretty much rode a jeep all the way through Europe. He was a new pastor at St. Mark's Parish at that time in St. Paul, Minnesota. I believe St. Mark's is right on Marshall Street in St. Paul. Marshall runs into Minneapolis.
He married my husband's parents when he was, my husband's parents at St. Mark's.
What's your last name?
Young, but when we got married
At
here,
St. Mark's,
I
huh?
told him, and he says, "Well, I was just a new priest. They just gave me people to marry."
That's the same thing he would tell me. He would tell me stuff like that. He was very down to earth, or he kind of despised authority. And to give you the reason for saying that was World War II broke out, and he was a brand new priest at St. Mark's Parish in St. Paul, and he decided that he was going to be a chaplain in the Army, so he went and talked to the pastor who was in charge, whatever he was, a Monsignor or something like that. And the man said, "You're not leaving here, and don't you even try." And he said, I just sat back and I thought to myself, okay, you're going to fight the U.S. government. He went down, applied to become a chaplain, and from within a week he was sent to Fort Crosby in Tennessee for his boot camp. Or basic, but he did what he wanted to do, and he made up his mind that he was going to do it. But anyway, take a look down there at that shrine, and if you get some day when you come here, I don't know if we'll walk down now, we can if you would like, but the shrine that he built down there, that was for the purpose of saying Mass on Memorial Day, and he did it for years and years. The men's club at St. John's, are you in it?
No.
David is. Didn't you people run the power down there?
No, we ended up having mass here because it was easier to get power here.
Okay. I remember being down there, and his vestments would be flapping up and down and all. It was it was a task, let's put it that way. But any questions? Does anybody want to add anything to this? Please do. Like I said, I'm not the sage of the West or sage of Hugo, so don't hesitate. I'm sure that somebody has a few thoughts here. Nobody?
Did he make the wrought iron?
You know, I wish I knew who did that. I'll be able to tell you who did the cross over there and a little story beyond that. But, well, you know, you had two Peltiers they had that blacksmith shop right by where the feed mill is. And his dad and I don't remember his dad's name, but I remember seeing him. Oliver, I think. Do you know Linda? Yeah. Oliver? Okay. Anyway, Oliver Peltier was Jean's father, and Jean and his second wife, Lillian, lived right by the store, by Marier's store there, which was Pelican's store prior to that. And one time, I got an idea. There were 3 or 4 ladies in Hugo and Centerville that joined the military in World War II. Margaret Netto and her sister Cecilia, and Shirley Lamott in Centerville, and Jeanette Letourneau, who lived right in Hugo. Okay, those 4 ladies had joined the military. And I contacted Shirley. She was the only one living then. She was my godmother and cousin. I contacted Shirley. I said, Shirley, I have an idea. I talked to Jim Gitz up in Hugo, and I mentioned to him that they should have a rock out here with a plaque on it. Now, you think about the size of Hugo and the size of Centerville. Hugo, you would be about 200 people. Centerville, probably 150 or 200 at that time. You know, early 1940s. For those 4 ladies, and the 2 Nettos lived on a farm. They would be Pete Netto's older sisters. Anyway, for those 4 ladies to take off from Hugo and go to Washington, D.C., or wherever they went at that age, and what they left here, you know, nothing wrong with it, but what they left here to go into a big city, think about the credibility gap that they had for a while. Think about going to D.C. from Hugo. You know, you go through boot camp in the Navy and then find yourself doing office work in D.C. And anyway, I mentioned to Jim, and he said, well, let's have somebody think about it. But I really thought that they should have a monument right out here by that flag for what they did at that time, both in their life. You know, you're 18 or 19 years old. Margaret Hensel, maybe you know that name?
Yep.
She married one of the wounded soldiers that she took care of. He was coming back from the South Pacific, and that was Leo Hensel, okay? Anyway, her job, she was commissioned an officer in the Army Nursing Corps, and her job was to fly from Pearl Harbor, Hawaii to San Francisco, bringing back wounded soldiers. Try that on for a job, okay? Anyway, quite a feat. Linda.
So I don't know who did this, but there is a structure like this at St. Genevieve's, and it's the French Fleur de Lis, I believe. Do you know who did that? Because Father didn't want that in this cemetery, so he put it at St. Genevieve's, but I'm wondering if the same man did it.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure, but I don't remember his name.
Why wouldn't he want it here?
But I don't know.
I don't know. There were a couple of things that he didn't like, so they ended up in Centerville because the man that made them was born and baptized in Centerville. I'll go over that when we get over there.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't like anything, and he was part French. Father Fortin was part French. From his mother's side. Let's walk right over here. There's a white, there it is right there, a white military marker.
You had asked me, Mike, but the rocks did come from Francis Lutz and my dad.
I forgot to mention that from Leo Lutz's farm and your farm.
And my dad.
I forgot to mention that, and I have it written down on my sheet.
Oh, that's all right. I just didn't know.
No, you should say something.
I thought it was true, but
Something I forgot to mention over there, and I should have looked at my notes because I had it written down, and George and I talked about it earlier in the week. I knew at that time that those rocks came for that shrine over there, came from someplace east of Hugo. And so I called George and I said, George, do you have any idea where those rocks came from? George Miron. And George said, yes, I do. They came from my dad's farm, Marcel Miron, and also Leo Lutz, who Francis Lutz took over that Leo Lutz's farm. So that's where the rocks for that came from. And you know, Father Fortin would muster up people to go. He had a pretty good size trailer and things like that, and he would muster up a few people. He never worked that hard, but he was a pretty good delegator and a pretty good. I always wanted to be an engineer, wanted to be a architectural engineer. His mother put him in the seminary at 11 years old.
and he, both Francis Lutz's and our barn, he wired them too. So he,
Father Fortin. Yeah,
he did electrical work.
He
too.
had talent that was beyond, you know, for a priest. Grew up, his parents had a hardware store, and his brothers told me anything where they had to have repaired or could look at in a manual of some sort. There was no computer. You weren't looking up something on a computer where it told you what to do. It was dig it out. We're standing here next to Andrew Blumhofer. Anybody ever heard that name before? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Pardon?
Out on 8A down
Yeah,
there. That's
exactly.
Right.
The farm real
on
close
top
to
of the road, on top of the hill up there.
Yeah, Herman Zager, and there was another farmer out there. Who was it? Zager and somebody else.
Yeah, but he was more straight east of here. Zager was,
Yeah.
where Blumhofer was right off of 8A on the south side of 8A.
Okay.
One of the land on the east side, north side.
One of the earliest funerals that I remember having served at, well, I should take that back. I remember when my grandfather Latendresse passed away in 1943. But Andrew Blumhofer was a soldier that was killed in Korea. And I remember coming to this, obviously the Legion was involved, they had a firing squad or a color guard and everything. But he was killed in Korea. And for a long time when I was young, when I came out here, I always had to come over and look at this grave site right here for Andrew Blumhofer. There was one other brother older than him, Jerome.
Yes, there was a Jerome Blumhofer.
Yeah. Anyway, the grave site says that he was killed in 1951, June 3rd, 1951. For some reason, as a young man, this really stuck with me, that here is this man. I was glad I came out here yesterday. I was glad to see that his father Frank and his mother were both buried on the same site that he is. And I'll tell you why. His death literally destroyed that marriage and that family. And that happened more than once in this area. But how many of you even knew of Andrew or Jerome or Frank was his father? Anybody other than George? Nobody? So there you are. That was one of the first memories I had of serving somebody that had come back from a war zone and planted right in this cemetery. There's quite a few of them if you walk around. Okay, the Bernier stone right behind me, there are 3 people. George Bernier told me this, and if he told me, it's gospel. He was mayor. He was mayor. Is there a Bernier here?
Carol.
Who?
This is Carol.
Carol.
You're serious. There you go. Now I know you. I just saw her at my sister-in-law's funeral. March. Anyway, there are 3 people. George Bernier told me this. I used to go sit with him when I would come back into Hugo. 3 people that started Hugo. Euclid Brisson and we still can't find out what the M means. Nobody knows. All the records say known as Euclid M. Brisson. We'll get there. It's right over there. And you got Linda, Judy, David. Any other Brissons? Gloria. Okay. We'll get over there, but there are 3 people that started Hugo.
Surrounded by Brissons, don't be scared.
And if you remember some of the stories that were told, Centerville existed, okay? There was Centerville. It was a village in Anoka County, and the railroad wanted to run through here, and they wanted to put a highway, Highway 61 through here, but the people in Centerville did not want anything close to them for fear that the train would run over their cattle.
Is that a folklore thing? Like, come on.
That's, and I'm not making that up, okay? We had a lot of relatives, elderly people that were born just before 1900 and 1878 and 1880. And that's the story that they would tell us, that they did not want the railroad running anywhere near Centerville, so it came right through here. There were 3 people that started Hugo, or got it going. One was one of the Berniers, and I've got the Bernier Marrier book, and I cannot come up with a man named Cyril Bernier.
My grandfather.
Cyril?
Yeah.
Okay, I
he
called
died
this.
even before my mom and dad were married.
Okay,
He lived in our house. That was their retirement house.
is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, I called Mary, your sister, Mary Louise Onstead, up in Duluth, and she told me she was quite sure it was Cyril and Mary.
Yes, that's what their name
Thank you.
was.
How about Peter and Joseph Bernier? Were they involved at all?
I don't know those names.
Okay. Anyway, their names come up as we move around.
There are some Berniers in Centerville
Oh yeah.
that are not related to us. But my grandfather came from Quebec, but he had a brother or something relative here, but we just don't know that.
Yeah. Well,
I have the genealogy on that. There's 2 Bernier lines.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm from the one,
Yeah.
and you're from the other.
Yes.
All right.
We're not related, really.
No.
Huh?
Way back.
Well, we could say we are.
Yeah. When my brother, and this is not an insult, but when my brother and I used to go fishing up in Canada, there's a whole bunch of the Berniers, many Berniers, in a place called Sioux Lookout in Ontario.
When I went to Canada in 1976, my husband and I drove up there, and I looked in the phone book, and there were pages like Johnson's here, but there were pages
Yes.
over here. So it's a very common name.
Their
up there.
mailboxes all have their name on it, and it was just row after row. But anyway, there are 3 people that started Hugo, and if George Bernier told me this, I'm going to believe it. So this is the truth as far as I'm concerned. There was a Bernier, Cyril Bernier, and I believe his wife's name was Mary. Okay. Euclid Latendresse, okay, and Euclid Brisson. Now those people kind of got Hugo going. My grandpa Latendresse, my dad's grandfather, so my great-grandfather, he had the store and he had the building there right where the road comes to a T. He had all that stuff to the right of that, and that Latendresse home is still back there. If you want to see it, parked by the, is it an optometrist? Or, but what's the place right where the T meets? It's some sort of a medical facility, isn't it? Does anybody know? Huh? Dentist office? Okay, that Latendresse building is right in back, and that was a poured concrete house. In other words, they poured concrete on the foundation or the slab, and they lifted up the walls. And I remember when Grandpa Latendresse died in 1943, they had the wake or the visitation right there in the house, and of course they had the drapes pulled, and you could see him sitting in the casket. That was kind of weird for a kid that was 8 years old or so. All right, so I just wanted you to to know that this is a man that lost his life in the Korean War, and there were a bunch of let's go in that direction. How are we doing time-wise? What time is it, George?
10:32.
Oh boy, we got to get going. I talk too much. Let's go right over here. If I've ever walked this cemetery row after row, but it's really interesting, the names that you see and stuff like that. Gloria, I've seen you out here working hard. Okay?
We're related to everybody out here.
Yes? You're going to have to walk a little faster. Tell George, you and I are old enough to be whatever.
Old enough to be in here pretty soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to go over that grave right there, Roger Crever. It was kind of a shock for the city of Hugo. You may not even know anything about it.
I am trying to help Hugo Historical Commission get their history on a free web page.
Yeah.
So I may try to get your email so I can get some information. And
Come on, gang.
you as well.
We're gonna. We'll be here till dark. Not really. I've only got 8 or 9 sites that I want to go over. I'm standing here. This would be my dad's father, who later he got killed in a gasoline truck accident. He was driving a gasoline truck for Carpenter Oil in Hugo. I got to think of the dates here. I should know them by heart. Well, there they are.
There they are.
In 1922, he had gone to bring some fuel. At that time, they would take fuel off the truck, put it into a 5-gallon can, and then carry it to the farmer's receptacle, whatever it was, tank or whatever it was. Anyway, they didn't have a chain on that truck to remove the static electricity. So figure it out. If you go to the airport and watch them refuel a plane, they still hook clips onto a metal part of the aircraft, usually the hold-down clip on top. And that's the reason why they do it, to get rid of the static electricity, run it into the ground. Anyway, he got killed on that date right there in July of 1922, and he passed away. And then I'll get back to why I'm standing here. His widow, which would be a Latendresse, we'll get there. Mary Latendresse was my dad's father. She remarried Adlor Tiro, T-H-E-R-O-U-X, okay? And he's buried right close by here.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was a caretaker for this cemetery from about 1920 until 82 or 83.
Wasn't George Lutz too? I mean, or George,
Oh, crap.
George King?
George King, wasn't he too?
Well, Adler would muster up anybody that could help him.
That's what I meant, George King.
Yeah. And George, we were standing over there next to George King's grave.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Right over there by the
He was a
flag.
character.
So, I'm sorry, what?
I said he was a character.
Well, there were a few of them around here, okay? It wasn't just George. But anyway, we're standing here. Roger L. Crever, 1946 to 1950. There was an accident that happened here in Hugo that kind of shook the town up. We were a small town.
Could you just repeat that? I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry. What about the accident?
Well, 5 young men walked out onto Hugo Lake.
Yeah, I know a little bit about it, yeah.
And there were 2 that drowned. And
2 of them?
you told me you never had heard this story.
I
So
think it was 3.
there were 2 that drowned. April 11th, April 10th of 1950, Roland Strickland, Donnie Marier, Larry Persicelli, Roger Crever, and Thomas Granger. At that time, we celebrated Easter Sunday. The day after Easter was Easter Monday. Nobody went to school or anything. And then the next day was Tuesday, okay? Anyway, 5 young men walked out there and went in the ice, through the ice. One of them happened to be your brother, my brother. I guess that would be it, huh? Gina and I are sisters, okay?
Brother and sister.
Not quite.
Huh?
Brother and sister.
Well, now don't get on me about that, because you never know.
You
what
don't
the
know.
gender is, okay?
You don't know, Gina.
Mine is. I'm a little bit suspect to begin with, okay? Anyway, they walked out on the thin ice. All 5 of them kind of went in, but the 3 of them were out in front, the 3 younger ones. They were about 1.5 years old at that time. And Roland Strickland ran back into the store, where his father, Strickland's store, right there in the middle of the town, and ran back in there, and his mother said, "Well, why are you so wet?" He said, "Well, we just fell in the water, and there's some kids in the water." So Joe Marier, Taylor Strickland, went into the water and pulled these kids out. two of them didn't survive, Thomas Granger and Roger Crever. They didn't have any kind of resuscitation device, okay? It was all that old style of Boy Scout.
Pump it out, yeah.
Yeah, you know, pump it out of them. They had a pulse on all of them. The water was still real cold, so you have to think about maybe hypothermia had set in, which was to their advantage. Anyway, two of them passed, okay, and drowned. We'll get to Tommy Granger's. Thomas Granger, he's over there in the corner where he was buried. But anyway, it was a real shock to Hugo, but imagine being in the 5th grade, you're 10 years old, and your younger brother drowns. You never forget it. You know, I mean, we all have a story like that, but it really, it was hard to swallow. I think Adler Tiro is buried right over here, and our Schoonover's here. Schoonover. Is that you? I'm Cynthia. Are you? Okay, you're Cynthia. I have this somewheres. This is a story about Adler Tiro, okay? I have this somewheres in a box in the garage because 2 years ago in December, Judy will attest to the fact that I went through the garage for about 3 days. Okay? And I know I saved this because this was my great-grandfather, but a step-grandfather. But anyway, they wrote an article in the White Bear Press. Do you have this? Okay. Anybody interested in Adler Tiro? He came from a real big family out of White Bear. Came into Hugo in about 1920, had a team of horses and a wagon. The city put him to work. The team of horses that he had were wild. They were always running away, wrapping around a telephone pole somewhere. You know, he had one big one, one little one that didn't get along, but I remember there were many, many runaways in Hugo with his horses running. So where are we going from here? Adler is buried right over here on the, yeah, there it is right there. I think so. Yeah. Right here. That was his first wife who had passed away, and then he married my grandmother. And there he is. The old Frenchman in town, Megalore Granger, one of the Mirons, the banker, Jean Letourneau, they never called him Adlor. They abbreviated it, Delore, D-E-L-O-R-E. But here was a guy that, you know, he wasn't that well trained in a trade or anything, but he cared for this cemetery, did a lot of work around Hugo. If there was a snowstorm, he'd be shoveling the church steps, stuff like that. And I'm sure he never got paid for that, shoveling steps at the church, but he did it willingly.
Michael, I'm 8 years old, and he's digging our house right over there. He's digging the basement with a scoop,
yeah,
and his horses.
Yeah.
And then when he retired from digging graves, my dad took over.
Did he?
For a number of years.
Okay, and then Jim Letourneau and Cedric Guffin were doing it also. Yeah.
I wonder how many graves this man dug.
He said he had no idea.
With a shovel.
With a shovel. A lot of the young men in town worked for him. They would probably get $10, whatever that, $12. They were getting $25 per grave to be dug, okay? So he would always pay the portion to, and these people you would know, Lee Crever, Mike Gibbs, and Chuck Bellin. Those three young men worked for him a lot out here digging graves. And Lee, I know this for a fact, he drove Father Fortin crazy because he would never use a tape or go to a benchmark. Don's shaking his head. He would never use a tape or go to a benchmark where he could measure off of to get the exact place to dig this grave. Everything was, he stepped it off, okay? And he would drive Father Fortin crazy because Father Fortin had the records at the church or the, you know, the rectory up there, and he'd say, "Shaboy, that's where it goes, right there." You know, Shaboy meant small boy or little boy. You know, calling Father Fortin Shaboy. Anyway, Father Fortin complained about that more than once. That he pretty much had a mind of his own as to where they were going to go. Lee told me my brother Lee told me when I talked to him that no, he was right on. Somehow he just knew all the graves and where they were. He said more than once we came across a grave that was a wooden box, and we had to kind of shave it, but we didn't shave it very much because these boxes were not in real good shape. But, so his method of measuring was scientific wild-ass guess, I guess. You know, he started stepping it off. Swag, that's called a swag system, in case you're wondering. Okay. Let's go right up here to Latendresse. Okay, I had mentioned earlier that there were 3 men that started Hugo. We mentioned Cyril Bernier. This would be another one, Lawrence, no, right here, Euclid Latendresse, okay? He had a very big family. I don't remember how many children he had, but there were a lot of boys. They eventually moved to Indiana and started a rock and sand business, cement, you know, in that, and they eventually went into insurance. But anyway, they had that land where the Muller, what's it called? The Muller what? You know where the people stay?
Muller Manor.
And where the parking lot, he had 10 acres there, okay, in there. And David, that's where your house went? Your dad's house, first house? Who else? Anyway, there you are. So anyway, he was an entrepreneur. There are a lot of records that, and I don't know if the Historical Society has gotten any of them, not. Charles Muller, when he moved to Carson City, Nevada, he took a lot of the records that Grandpa Latendresse had. And the story around Hugo was, and the farmers would come in with hay or potatoes. How many of you remember the potato warehouse over there by the old depot? Anybody?
I remember.
Thank you. All right. Anyway, he would buy potatoes. Evidently the sand soil here around Hugo was good for growing potatoes. And he had that, so the story in Hugo was, don't argue with him. If he says this is what we owe each other for the potatoes or for the hay or for whatever, he had kind of a warehouse over there where I mentioned earlier where the dentist's office is, and he stored a lot of stuff there and sold it as he wanted to. But he also had the grocery store prior to the Brissons, okay? And he just was an entrepreneur. But he's the second person that would have started Hugo. And with that, we'll move straight down the road and get down to Brissons. A lot of stories about them Brissons, boy. They were a rough crew, okay? Anybody wondering why the word blackbird is there?
It's a Laterno.
That's a Laterno. And that Laterno goes all over this country. I've met a couple people in Chandler, Arizona that I was golfing with, and I said, do you know what the moniker or the nickname of your name Laterno is? And right away, both of them knew it was Blackbird. And I remember looking in some old Metoscan yearbooks at White Bear High School, and sure enough, a lot of the young people signed it Blackbird. And Jim Laterno had a sea bag. Is Sandy here? Jim Laterno had a sea bag from his days in World War II, and his name on that sea bag was Blackbird. That isn't that long ago. The third person to start Hugo is Euclid M. Brisson, and I've looked at David and Kathy Brisson had some papers they wanted me to look at last night, and he's known in those papers, and they go way back to starting out about 1800 straight up, okay? And they still put in there Euclid M. Brisson, but we don't know what the M stands for. And Linda Cummins and I, tried to find out about 2 years ago what the M stood for in his name, and we couldn't find any record of it. I believe it was Euclid Charles Brisson was what his real name was, okay? Don't you think?
Well, I thought it was Charles Euclid.
Charles Euclid?
Yeah.
Okay.
He had an uncle or something that was Charles.
Okay, what's important about this gravesite right here? There's a gentleman right over there named Willis Brisson. Willis was in the Navy in World War II. He was assigned to a landing craft. He was a gunner's mate, which is very common. They hold on to a pretty severe weapon. Willis came back in about 1949 in a military casket, okay? That was quite a celebration for the Legion. The Legion had just kind of got going in about 1947, and when they brought him back, it was customary in the Navy, if you had a Navy veteran that had gotten killed or even died after World War II or the Korean War or whatever, they would stand guard all night on the casket. And when my father died in 74, I think, yeah. Let me think for a second when they were married. And when, Gina, 74, wasn't it? Oh.
Should I go look?
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, I told you I wasn't the stage of Hugo. Anyway, the older veterans from the Legion, they were all Navy. They all stood guard over his casket the entire night, so it was something. Anyway, Willis Brisson is buried right over here where you see the star, and he was a son of Euclid Brisson. Euclid Brisson, they had their home right there where that saddlery place is, just before Ray Lamont's, after the church. Are you with me? Yeah. There was a building there, but that was their home right next to that creek, and I used to deliver papers to him, and you know, all these old gentlemen had a story. I hope I never get to that point, but they all have a story. You can ask a doctor that tends to elderly people, and they all want to tell a story, so you got to give them time to find out if they were a baseball player or whatever they did, you know, accountant. He worked a lot in the lumber camps, and he had 3 sons, Clifford, Willis, and Dennis, huh? Where's George?
Yeah.
Those 3 sons, was it?
Yeah, this is where this Euclid Brisson is here in Della.
Yeah.
And that's Willis here.
Right.
So, yeah.
So that's where they're buried. Anyway, he had worked quite a bit in the lumber camps, and he would like to tell, you know, you're delivering papers and someone's waiting for the newspaper at 7 in the morning. He would always say, I was pretty good with the hacks, which meant the hacks. If you think back and if you grew up here, an awful lot of the Frenchmen here, there were certain letters they couldn't pronounce. They couldn't pronounce the H. Right. It was not Helen, it was Ellen, okay? And they would cut it a little bit short. But anyway, Euclid is buried over there. I remember when he passed away. But Willis, his son. All right, here's the story. Bob Brisson was working in South Dakota for Ma Bell. I suppose it would have been Mountain Bell at that time. Does anybody remember? Anyway, Bell Telephone. Huh?
It was Northwestern Bell.
There you go, Northwestern Bell. And Bob was making a service call, Robert Brisson was making a service call to somebody in one of the towns in South Dakota. That's where he lives. Sioux Falls?
Sioux Falls, yeah.
Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He was making a service call, and the man that he was to meet came out and met him, and he said, I need to talk to you about your name, but let's get the business out of the way first. And the story was the man that he was going to meet and talk to held that man right there in his arms when he died. He got killed on a landing craft. He was a gunner's mate on a landing craft. I go like that because that's what they hold on to. Anyway, Bob talked to him about it, and he said, I will find out if the family wants to know anything about how the man died. And when Bob came back to Hugo on a trip, he tried to get the family together to see if anybody wanted to know about how their brother or their son died. And everybody in that family, to include Dennis, but Euclid had the word, okay? We do not want to know it. We already lived through it once, and we don't want to go through it again. And I wish I would have paid more attention when Bob was telling me the stories. He was living in Sun City. I used to go over and see him probably monthly and sit and talk with him. But that was one of the stories that he had told me was about Willis Brisson over here. And again, this man right here is one of the 3 people that started Hugo. This is a pretty nice looking stone here. A cousin of mine, Sharon Vale, and I were out here one Memorial Day kind of kicking sod, and we came across this graveside. There were 2 people born or buried here. One was Euclid, and one was our great-grandmother, Mary Emily Pelletier. They had 2 stones that were closer together than those 2, but they were about that deep in the sod, okay? And I told Sharon, I said, Sharon, we need to do something about this. This isn't right. It would be Euclid's second marriage and my grandmother, great-grandmother, which would be the mother to Aunt Ruth Brisson.
Our grandma.
Come on, help me out. Our grandmother and you know, a bunch of people. Anyway, Sharon wasn't too enthused, so I found a lady that was. Her name is Linda Brisson Cummings, okay? And we got going on it, okay? And I guess we started about that time, but we had to wait for the winter to go by and get everything. Anyway, Linda and I went to our family and said, hey, we need 45 or 50 bucks from this number of people to buy this stone right here, this footstone, and get it installed. Well, we had money left over. People were pretty enthused about that. They, Euclid Brisson and Mary Emily Pelletier must have made a mark on somebody. So Linda and I got cranking here, and we got this stone installed about 2 years ago, but it was installed before Memorial Day of 2021. And that wasn't easy, okay? That was during COVID. But we had a few people. Nancy was on vacation in River Falls, and she went over to Melgard's and got it approved, got it put in. You see Bob Brisson is here. Bob Brisson told me more than once that would be Linda's uncle, come on, David's uncle, Gloria's uncle, Mary's uncle. You know, somebody has said on the way over, everybody's related. Don't talk about anybody between Hugo and Central because you're going to get cut up. Okay? You're going to lose.
What's bad to say, Mike?
It's what?
There's nothing bad to say.
Nothing bad to say.
Anyway, Bob Brisson, World War II, he went into Normandy D-Day plus 13, so figure it out. 13 days after the landing on June 6th, he entered, and the first place he entered was up on that corner where the Germans had a big port. It was in France, okay? And he had a lot of decent stories. He did receive the Purple Heart, and he did receive the Bronze Star. But I used to, like I said earlier, I used to spend quite a bit of time with him because he was so interesting to talk to. He didn't always feel that he was interesting to talk to, and then he would buy me lunch. It was a big deal. And I'm going to buy you lunch, Mike. Dave was laughing. And he would take me to McDonald's. He said, you can have all the hamburgers you want. Anyway. But he was a big strapping man, okay? He was a pretty good sized lad. He's the one that got the story about Willis Brisson that the family did not want to hear about. So, moving on. You know, I got to look at my notes. I'm not sure where we're supposed to go next. Let's walk over to the cross where the Lacosses are. Well, maybe not. Here, let's go down to the corner where Tom Granger is, right down in here. He was the second one that drowned in April of 1950. Is that all right?
This is wrong.
Oh, yeah.
You have a
They're reading something from a tree.
Down branches and everything, right in the cemetery.
I don't really know. No.
when you send them away.
Oh, that's a different one. This is the one in Google.
Ready? Okay. The gravesite right here is Thomas Granger. He was one of the 5 that went out onto the Hugo Lake in April of 1950, and one of the 2 that drowned, okay? The parents, my mother and dad and Gertrude and Joe Granger, the first, the visitation was at Godbout Mortuary on 7th Street out in St. Paul, and that was the first night. The second night they brought the visitation into the basement of the church, and you know, it was just covered with people, you know, people from the east side and people from everywhere. Well, to me as a young kid, I was 10, that it didn't take a whole lot of people to make me think this is a lot of people. And anyway, that drowning that Thomas Granger was subject to, that really destroyed their family. Joe Granger, I never knew the man was in the military until yesterday when I walked this. He never went to work after that. He lived down at the lighthouse place. I used to see him in downtown St. Paul because I was working down there. What's the one where they joke about the light? You know, where people can stay and get a meal.
Union Gospel Mission.
Yeah, there you go. It was a mission. And I would see him walking around down there. And of course, Gertrude still had one son.
Jim. He's right there.
Where is he? Jim,
He also
okay?
died of cancer pretty young.
Yeah, he died of cancer. He would have been your age.
Yep,
Yeah.
he was living.
Your age?
Yep.
Anyway, and Gertrude was buried over here, but she worked at Pearson Candy Company for years and years and years and years. I mean, and anyway, it really destroyed husband and wife, and that isn't the first one. The Blumhofer, as I mentioned earlier, kind of came out the same way. But I thought that might be interesting that you knew a little story about kind of a accident, if you would, or a situation that really shocked Hugo. And here, you might be interested in this. My mother and dad never got a bill from Godbout Mortuary. I hope the Grangers had the same, but they never got a bill, you know.
I remember you telling us a story, Mike, about everybody in the church saying the rosary when the little boys...
You want me to tell it?
Yeah, I do.
Tell that.
I do. I think it's a good story.
We were in elementary school. At that time, the school was right above the church, if that's the one you want. And they excused anybody that wanted to go over to the church and say the rosary that they could resuscitate these two young boys that they had in the back of the station. Where the automotive, is that Southern Automotive or something like that? That used to be a gas station there. Anyway, Gene Sontag was our teacher, Jim Gitz was there, and they excused anybody that wanted to go over to St. John's and say the rosary to pray to God that these two young boys would be resuscitated or brought to. And I remember we were in there, and it was pretty serious, to be very frank about it. You know, you don't, well, figure it out. Anyway, my Aunt Ruth, Linda, David, and Mary's grandmother. Huh?
And Gloria.
And Gloria. And Gloria. My Aunt Ruth walked in with a little jigger of brandy for my mother. And when I told the Brissons about it, they said, "Oh, I can't believe that. Aunt Ruth didn't drink a drop and didn't really approve of anybody ever drinking a drop." So it was quite a story that, you know, I mean, we're all lined up. There's about 2 full pews of people on their knees saying the rosary. And some of the relatives from Centerville had come over. They'd heard about it, and just my Aunt Ruth would be their grandmother, walked in with this little jigger of brandy and said, "Lorraine, you're going to need this." And so my mother just horsed it down with it. So
I love that story.
that's the kind of
It's really sweet. It's very sweet.
that's the kind of village, town that Hugo was. I mean, for years after, they would always stand together. It didn't make any. You've all seen that picture that everybody was 100% for war bonds in World War I.
Yeah.
All right, are you ready for this? My father, when he was postmaster, he sat down with Gene Letourneau, and that's where they got all the names. So when you see that long linear picture there, the only 2 people I could recognize was Mrs. Wenzel and Clarence Wenzel. That's the only 2 that I could recognize. But he got Gene Letourneau and himself to go over all those people that are in that picture. If you don't know what I'm talking about, walk into the bank, U.S. Bank.
I don't know what it is.
Is that what it is?
The bank.
Right in Hugo. It's on the wall. Take a look at it. There's a lot of them. There's one at the blacksmith, but it doesn't have all the names on it. So, bit of trivia.
How did your parents do it? It destroyed the Granger couple. How did your parents
Well,
do?
that always amazed me. I had talked with Roy Brisson about it, Linda's father, David's father, Judy's father. That, yeah, it is. My
How
mother,
did their family stay together?
my mother was able to move on. Even Roy was a cousin to my mother, and he even said that. He said, I don't think I've ever seen anybody move on so quick as your mother. There was so much going on. There was my brother Tom, who's buried over there, and that's myself and my sister Connie or Constance. Those were the 3 children. Then after Roger drowned, Lee was born in 1951. But she was just able to move on and take it. I'm sure she had a lot of grief. Aunt Ruth, their grandmother, spent a lot of time talking with my mother.
The only one I know personally that lost her 16-year-old daughter in a car accident, her faith is what brought her through. So maybe your mother was very, very believing.
She was very religious.
Yes. That makes sense then.
We were on our knees a lot saying the rosary during the Korean War. And Gloria's shaking her head.
Did you have to say the rosary before you could watch Grandpa and Grandma TV?
Well, we had to go over to Vale's house, or during the Korean War, one family hosted the rosary for a whole week. And I remember Ron and Don Wenzel, they were definitely Lutheran, don't you know? If they
had to say the rosary too.
When they showed up, you kneel until it was over. Yeah. It's the way it was, okay? We can't change it.
Right, wrong, or otherwise.
Oh, yeah.
That's the way it was.
Anyway, Grace, we're going to go over to your La Valley site, okay? And would you say a few words?
No.
You sure? Would you tell me what you want me to say and I'll say it? Okay. Hi.
Sorry.
You okay? Sure of that, and maybe Grace or the other La Valley lady that's here. I believe that the La Valley people donated all this land for the cemetery and the city of Hugo Park, the original park. Am I right or wrong?
Yes,
Pardon?
that's right.
That's right, okay?
This is La Valley land.
Yes, it was, okay? And at one time, of course, at that time, after the Civil War, you had to receive a patent for the property that you had. And I don't know a whole lot about that. Do you?
Well, I know you can go to the patent office and get the application.
Right.
No, I just know that was the process for homesteading.
Yeah.
We homesteaded July 7th, 1865.
1865, that was right after the Civil War. I'm glad you said that. Because after the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln was president for a short time, and he wanted to get South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa filled up because of all the Indian problems. When you think back, 2 cities in southern Minnesota, New Ulm and Mankato, where each of those instances, I believe there were almost 100 or there were over 100 people, white people killed from the Indian uprising. And you can't blame the Indians. They did not want to give up their land. It was their land. So Abraham Lincoln was awarding 80 acres to anybody that wanted to move to these areas, and especially the Civil War veterans. They were all given 80 acres in this area, a lot of it in Minnesota, and we'll come across that in just a little while. But the long and the short of that whole thing is the La Valleys. What's your first name? Denise. Denise? D&D? Yeah, okay. Denise was aware of the date, and I knew that the history here was that the La Valley family, and I remember one of the grandmothers. You probably don't, but I remember one of them very well. I believe it was Alex, your father's mother. She lived with them.
Adele, she's right there. Yeah. My grandpa died in 1930 and she died in 1952.
Okay, I remember her quite well. Anyway, you know, so when you think about it, if someone would have donate all the land that was for the city park and all this land right here that's for the cemetery, quite a donation.
One of the reasons we ended up being able to have this is because the South ceded to become the Confederate, and then they were no longer allowed to vote. All those landowners down there did not want this Homesteading Act. They thought it was going to dilute and ruin their huge acquisitions. So once the South was no longer involved, then the Congress was able to pass through the Homestead Act.
Okay.
So we got that break during that Civil War.
Yeah.
And hence, we have all this in Minnesota.
Thank you. Another thing that came about, and Linda and I probably know this, that at the same time Lincoln designated every state or territory to put aside 80 acres for a library, so that every document that came through the federal government had to be sent to all 48 states or less than that. Like Minnesota became a state in 1858, shortly after the Civil War, but there were still states out west that were not, there's still territories out west that were not states. So anyway, he designated, or he forced all the state governments or the territorial governments, you need to designate 80 acres as a federal repository for anything that's published or comes through the government, and we will send them a copy of everything that comes through. Hence, University of Minnesota, University of Arizona. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
Every university that was there at that time, whether it was territory or state, had to designate 80 acres for a federal repository so that anything that was published had to go through that library. And you know, think about that. I mean, this is just after the Civil War. Look at the impact that had on this country. You know, Ben, was there? Do you know if there was one up in Grand Forks at UND? I don't know. Well, it's got to be at Grand Forks or at the.
Well, they're all land grant.
Land grant universities all over every state has one. I mean, in the north.
Yeah, and that was, you know, having that kind of foresight is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Denise, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Because
well, Adele was a lacrosse, so Tom and I are second cousins.
Here we go.
My grandmother was of a cost too.
George and I, we're all second cousins.
You said everybody's related.
the moral of the story is don't say anything about anybody from Hugo or Centerville, because there's going to be a link there somewhere. So.
It's all close knit.
Yeah. Let's walk over here by the cross, and there's kind of a couple of stories about that. Where's Tom? Tom Lacoste.
It's right there in the blue shirt,
Yeah,
dark
I need him after we leave here.
Father Leventure.
Okay, Father Leventure. Father Leventure came from France, directly from France to Hugo to be the priest here. He was a gymnast, and he didn't have much of a sense of humor. My dad was an altar boy for him, and Jerry Brisson, that would be David's grandfather, and these right to Judy and Linda. One more, Mary. There you are. Jerry Brisson always had a few stories about Father Leventure, but the fact that he was pretty well built physically, he didn't take anything from anybody, and either he was from France, so if you read any books about the religion in France, that was it. And no matter what went on, if the priest said, this is what we're going to do, or whatever, it was done that way. But anyway, if somebody challenged him about what his decisions were, keep in mind there wasn't a whole lot of money at that time in this area to disperse. If I remember, the pews all had names on them, and you sat in in a certain pew, and you donated a certain amount of money each year to have that place to sit. Sounds kind of strange. Anyway, Father Leventure would flat challenge anybody that didn't like the decision that he made. And as a result, he made a few enemies in and around Hugo. You know, some of these farmers were pretty well built also as a result, and they didn't like his whatever. He died in 1941. At that time, Father Vandenbosch was the pastor here when the church burned in 1947. I remember sitting and looking at the fire, and they never really knew how it got started, but they surmised that a transient had gone into the church. At that time, the church was always open, and a transient had gone into the church and I suppose tried to stay warm or something, I don't know. But anyway, It pretty much devastated a lot of Catholics in this town. Not devastated, but you know, here they were building another church, or building it up. They were able to save the walls, and I remember they had braces on the walls to keep them standing, because what happens after a fire, it weakens the concrete and weakens the wall. But Father Van der Bosch came in, and as I recall, well, he died, I don't recall it, he died in 1947. The church burned in December of 46. He died in, he might have, the church burned in 47, as I recall.
No.
Right, David?
No. 47, because our parents had to get married in
White Bear.
Okay.
47.
In
47?
Yeah.
Anyway, then along came Father Fortin, and here's a man that's walking around in khaki GI trousers, working shirt, at the interstate half the time. He really put that parish back together.
Yeah.
And he had the ability, as we said earlier, that he could build almost anything. And that was a tremendous ability for that church, because there wasn't a whole lot of money floating around. A lot of the ironwork, I don't know what happened to it. They had a tabernacle, and they had a communion rail, and they had a baptismal room. A lot of that ironwork, I don't know what happened to it, but E.O., Gene Peltier, the blacksmith, did all that.
There's a story there Jerry Pelletier told me.
Go ahead. I think he has a little bit of it.
He has the whole thing. When they took the communion rail out, he just happened to see the truck loading them into the truck. And then we convinced them that he could take that. So if you go to his house in Forest Lake, it's in the house. That's his railing.
He lives in Clear Lake, I know that.
Yeah, it still does. So we rescued it, and it was his grandfather that made it.
Yeah, it was beautiful work. You know, all real heavy-duty wrought iron and bent and heated. And I remember my dad and I and my brother Tom went over and painted the top railing, which was wood. Okay. Well, we painted it on the ground and then we attached it. But it was beautiful work. And the tabernacle choir and also that baptismal fount that he had, that was, you know, tremendous.
A story about Father Lorenzo.
Go ahead.
My mother and father used to say that when he had Mass, he would give the sermon in French, and then he would give it in English too, because not everybody spoke French, so he had to give it in 2 languages, so Mass was pretty long. So
When the church burnt, I was born in 1947, and I was baptized in the barn.
Yeah,
a lot of people were baptized in the barn until the church was finished.
Well,
probably some people here.
I think
I just let you know how old I am.
I think Jeanette Letourneau and Bob Vadnais got married in the barn.
Right.
We used to have daily Mass there every morning. But now, there weren't any animals in there at that time, but it was still a barn, okay? It was no doubt it was a barn.
No, I don't. The barn's not there anymore.
Yeah, it's gone.
Father Fortin? Is that the barn that Father Fortin carries horses?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have
Nobody even knows there was a horse show there.
I want to drag this out, but I have a Joe Marrier story.
Go ahead.
That I recorded him 10, 15 years ago, and I just happened to listen to it the other day. And this story's on there. It's just wonderful. So he's, I don't know, 10 years old or something, and he went to confession. He says, "Father, I stole some apples." And the priest says, "And where were they?" "Well, right behind the church here." And Father, and real loud, he says, "Those are my apples." So everyone in the church knew Joe stole some apples. And I think he gave him like a million Hail Marys to say or something.
I suppose, yeah. 3 and 3. One of the other stories I wanted to cover, the Cody brothers are buried.
Over there.
Right over here, huh? And that was a real shock.
Oh, yeah, they're right up there.
Yep.
Oh, does it? Okay, that was a real shock that they would be buried here, because they came here against their will. They really didn't want to come to Hugo, but they did.
Well, Nick didn't.
Nick, was it Father John?
Yeah,
Father Nick?
I thought Father Fortin would be buried here, and he wanted to be buried here, but his 2 older brothers, his family, there was 1 sister and 2 other brothers, they brought him over to Hugo, Minnesota, and I had known him real well, and I wrote kind of a documentary about him, and Jim Getz got up and wrote it. What was, Judy, what was the reason why I didn't come up? Do you remember, for his funeral, Father Fortin?
They were supposed to call you and let you know when it was, and no one ever got in touch with you.
Yeah, kind of crazy. Tom Lacoste, where are Cyril and, is it Eleanor Lacoste? The couple that got hit by the train.
Delina.
Well, that's my great aunt and uncle.
They're right over, I think they're over there.
I thought it was right over here. Oh, let me go over, go ahead.
One quick little story that my dad told us
Go ahead.
about Father Leventure. He was in the French Army, correct?
He was where?
In the French Army.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he always had a beard, which I don't think was copacetic, but my dad told me that the reason he was able to have a beard was because he had gotten gas fire or some kind of fire and his face was disfigured, and so whomever allowed him to have a beard so he could cover his face.
Okay.
That's what my dad told me.
Yeah, and keep in mind that he was kind of a fight person. He didn't have much of a sense of humor, and that was told by many people. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this cross. E.O. Peltier, Jean Peltier, built a cross, okay, in his blacksmith shop. And this had to be in the early 50s. When was this constructed?
It says right there.
That doesn't make any difference, huh?
Oh, that's just their birthday.
Yeah. Anyway,
When I watched Joe Gamboni
You were about 10?
welded.
weld it.
Yeah. Anyway, E.O. Peltier built a nice cross. It was a kind of a French fleur-de-lis. Okay, he built it in his shop over here. Either Father Fortin came over to look at it, or he brought it to Father Fortin's rectory over there in St. John's Baptist. And Father Fortin didn't like it, and he kind of ticked off the blacksmith. Okay. And the blacksmith was real easy going. If you busted a wagon or something, you could bring it up there, and you'd gotten your allowance together, and you'd say, okay, what do I owe you? He said, don't worry about it. I'll get a beer from your dad. Well, anyway, Father Fortin didn't like it, so he said, that's fine. I was born in Centerville. I was baptized in Centerville, and I will put this cross up in the Centerville Cemetery. If you ever get to the Centerville Cemetery, right when you enter, there's a beautiful French cross. Beautiful. I'm telling you, the man did a beautiful job. I showed Linda about a year ago. And Bob, where's Bob Schaefer? Right, gone?
Right next to
Right next to Linda?
Oh, I showed it to Bob Schaefer that there's a plaque on there that says Eugene O. Pelletier built in whatever year, and that year had to be in the early 50s, all right? He had it resurrected there, and it's a beautiful, beautiful cross that he built. If you've ever gotten over to Centerville, it's worth the time to pull in and take a look at what he did, the work that he did. And he's another man that left a heck of a footprint in town. You heard people talking about a communion rail. You heard people talking about a baptismal fountain. You heard people talking about a tabernacle and one off to the side that when they take the sacraments out during Easter, they moved them over to the side. But he did all that. And I often wondered what he really got paid for the work that he did. He finally went to work at the arms plant. Do you know where the arms plant is on Highway 96? Mm-hmm. And he went over there because he knew different ways to work with steel, heat steel, do this with it, bend it that way. An interesting man. He smoked Crooks rum-soaked cigars, and a bunch of us used to hang out at the Rendezvous at night. Darrell Granger, John Kostock, myself, my brother Tom, Leonard Sharpenter, you must know some of these people I've named. And he always loved to tell Lillian, well, I got to go out and get some cigars. Well, he had plenty of cigars. His goal was to walk up Highway 61 to where all of us young kids hung out and drink beer with us because he knew we'd buy them all. Beer was 10 cents a glass. How could you go wrong? With that, I haven't. Any questions or any comments? Because I appreciate any comments.
One comment I have. Sometimes I'm asked, what's the oldest grave in the cemetery?
It's a young kid.
Yeah, young. Over by that red car, there's an upright in front of that red. It says Emma, and I'm not sure right now what the last name is, but that was 1904.
Okay.
And that's the oldest one.
And that's the oldest one I've found. Now, I don't know how old the stone is, but that's the date.
Well, the deed donating the property is 1904.
Right.
Okay, there you go. All right.
Wow.
I have a copy of the deed.
Do you?
Yeah.
Thank you, Denise. Anybody else with a comment or anything? Because we got like one more stop. Where's Linda?
I'm ready.
Linda, I failed to tell the story about Euclid M and
Mary Emily,
Mary Emily.
which story?
Well, the one about their little markers, they're about that
Oh,
big.
yes.
They were probably 8 by 8 inches.
Yeah.
And Linda and I looked at it. There
Started
you
it,
go.
but never finished.
I don't know that you finished, but you did start it.
Did I? Anyway, Linda, and it's right over here on the Brisson plot. Linda and I got together on a Memorial Day, and I said, we have to do something about this. This isn't right. So we called upon each family, and we needed like $45 or $50 from whoever wanted to contribute. We ended up with $150 or $140 more than what we needed. And so
Well, in reality, we were able to get a bigger stone.
there you go. And Gina has Mary Emily. Gina, right there. Where is she? Gina has Mary Emily at her house. And that's all it said. It said Mary E. and Euclid M. Now, what kind of a way is that to bury somebody and not even put their name on there? You know, Mary E. and Euclid M.
Okay, what about the ones that just say mother and father?
Well, I can't help it. But,
Well, then there's that.
But we took a look at it and we said, we're going to do something about this. So we got the money, and we had some money left over, so then I called on a bunch of people that I need, Richard and Roland Granger, my son Jim, Rita, my sister, Linda. A bunch of us contributed some money, $100 each. We ended up with $1,000. Linda, what did we do with it? Tell them.
We donated it to the Legion Club because you see every Memorial Day those stars or other plaques that are on all the veterans' graves. And some of the older ones were plastic, they were breaking, and they're $50 a piece, and we donated the $1,000 so that they could purchase more and upgrade some of them. So,
Yeah. Maybe you've realized now that this cemetery, for the Berniers, the Lacasses, for the Brissons, for the Valleys, for the Mariers, for the Mirons, this was and Judy, this was an important place for us. A lot of stuff took place in this cemetery that we remember. And, you know, just by the stories that George and Denise and the people have told you, Gloria, that there was a big part of our life, to be very frank about it, okay? So was the church, St. John the Baptist. I mean, that's where we met. That's where you met as a Boy Scout. That's probably where you met when you graduated from elementary school. The basement was always open.
So we would come up as kids and play in the park or play in the cemetery, and we'd always take water out of that pump. We'd all have to.
Where was the pump? Is
It's right around here somewhere. Okay.
Somebody stole the pump.
Somebody stole it? Really?
That's what I heard.
There's a dirt spot that is...
Okay. I know. I didn't realize.
Okay,
Was that it?
well, anyway,
Yes.
that's how this, Joe Gamboni and Jean Lacoste, where's Tom? Put this cross together. Evidently it pleased the good Padre, and the rest is history, okay? Tom Lacoste.
He's busy.
Thomas, where are Cyril and his wife? It's right around here.
It's right over there.
Okay, let's go over there. There's a little story there. Tell us for Lacoste. This is, my mother had the story. I don't know, well, he was in the Civil War, but I don't know if he was awarded.
He fought for both sides.
Carol, yeah. I don't know the story.
I'm going to get there.
I know the story because
Go ahead.
my grandmother, married to the Cyril, she used to sit on her house, at her house, right next on our road, and she'd have a corncob pipe.
Right.
And she didn't have any money. She was a widow, and they asked her, well, didn't your husband fight in the Civil War? My dad told me all this.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah. So they looked it up, and they found out that he had fought on both sides,
Correct.
which was not unusual because I've got relatives on my mother's side that the same thing happened. And so they got her a pension for, so she could, like $13 a month or something, so she could survive. But he was living on the East Coast, and then he went down to Mississippi and he was working in a brickyard. That's my understanding. I hope I got it right. And they conscripted him, the South did, and he says, I'm a Northerner, I'm not fighting for you. And they said, oh, yes, you are. And as soon as he had a chance, he ran away to the North.
Yep.
And he was very, very tough guy. I mean, he was a rugged and individual, and you didn't mess with him either, I guess. But he was my dad's I think they were grandparents to my dad, if I remember right. You know, but she lived right next to the Ethiers in a little house.
Right next to what?
Ethiers, where Ethiers live.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he was with the 6th Connecticut Infantry during the Civil War. And
that's where he ran back to them.
Yeah, there's a little bit more. He ran back to them, and then he got captured and was put into Andersonville, which is right down by where Jimmy Carter lived. I'm trying to think of the name of the town. I visited it about 15, 20 years ago, Andersonville. There were 40,000 Union soldiers put in there. It was a pit. 20,000 died from different diseases, and there was no food, and that's probably why Telespor Lacoste said, I have enough of this. He escaped and went back up and fought for the North again the second time.
But he used a different name.
Did he?
Because somehow I heard that he used a different name because he was afraid that they would, if they knew where he was from, they would have killed him right away.
Well, there's a little bit more to the story from what my mother told, and she probably got it from your father, George, was that he got a girl in Canada in trouble. You know, same
I
one?
heard that too.
Okay.
Now that you mention it. Withholding information, Carol?
No, you just forget all this stuff unless you write it down.
Well, and he migrated to Connecticut and joined the Connecticut Army. I suppose, you know, he was on the loose and moving.
They were supposed to be married. He left her at the altar and came to the U.S.
Is that right?
And he kept going south. That's how he ended up in the Southern Army. He was just trying to get the hell out of there.
Anyway.
I heard he was working in a brickyard down there.
Yeah.
Ammo factory.
An ammo factory? Okay.
There's Cyril's grave here, Mike.
Where?
How are you?
Eleanor, is this? That's my great
And that was my dad.
Right. Okay, that cross that's over there was dedicated to Cyril and Alina? Delina, yeah. Lacoste, okay? And the story with them was they had been over at Mike Doherty's house on a Saturday night playing cards. They left the Doherty property, Mike and Mary Doherty, and got hit by the train on the tracks. That was on a Saturday night. Father Fortin announced it at the Mass on Sunday morning, and so some people resurrected a cross in their honor, but they were both killed in 1964, and that was another setback for the community of Hugo. That was serious, okay, to get hit. And there were a lot of people that had close scares with that train that was coming across there. Pardon?
No markings.
Yeah. No markings, nothing going down. I remember one Sunday morning, it was kind of in the winter, Dorothy Burkhardt was going to church with a group of children, and she almost got hit by that train. She just made it over the tracks and the train came flying through. So, when Ed and Mabel Granger first moved into that house that was a Trudeau home right across from the subway, it's been destroyed now, or razed. Anyway, Ed was kind of a character, Mr. Granger, and they would get one or two trains at night, you know, one going to Duluth, another one coming back, and he would yell, "Hold on, here comes another one," you know, and of course the family was trying to sleep and he was making a joke of the trains going right, you know, the railroad runs through the middle of the house. So. I think that's probably where we're at. What time is it? I've talked enough. I would like to go around round robin and
20 to 12.